Hello to everyone and welcome to our breakout session, bringing down systemic barriers to defeat inequality. I am your moderator, Sheilah Montgomery, the President CEO of FAMU Federal Credit Union in Tallahassee, Florida. A couple of housekeeping things I'd like to go over first. All sessions will be recorded and uploaded within 2 weeks. The recordings will be accessible the same way you access the sessions through the conference. And later, it will be on Inclusiv website. To maintain the integrity of the recordings, we ask all participants who are not speaking to please mute your microphones during the session. We encourage you to put your view into the grid view in the top right side of the screen. This enables you to see all the other session attendees. Time permitting, we will have a question and answer period at the end of today's session. Please use the chat to ask questions for the presenters, and we will pass them on to the moderator. Send your questions to the participant named questions for speakers with the 2 asterisks. You will find them at the top of the participants list. We do encourage you to share your insights, your learning through social media with the hashtag CDCUC on 2020. If you experience any technical difficulties during this presentation, please feel free to send a private chat to our tech team, AdvancedNet. Again, I welcome you all to this session. Now, I have the honor of introducing 2 distinguished panelists. I will give you their names and their abbreviated bio because they have so much work they have done. First, we have Edgar Hernandez. Edgar Hernandez is a multicultural strategy manager with CUNA Mutual Group in Madison, Wisconsin. He is dedicated to advancing the efforts of the new Multicultural Center of Expertise, which includes gaining a deeper understanding of underserved consumers, partnering with internal departments to develop new strategies and products to serve consumer needs, and building coalitions that support similar efforts outside of CUNA Mutual Group. Prior to this role, Edgar worked as the business development manager for a top-tiered product innovation firm, Design Concept. Our second panelist will be Ms. Angela Russell. Angela is the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at CUNA Mutual Group. Angela is responsible for leading the development, direction, and implementation of short and long-term strategies and programs that support diversity, equity, and inclusion. Ms. Russell has over 16 years of professional experience involving diversity and inclusion, external relations and outreach, communications, policy development, and research and evaluation. Prior to joining CUNA Mutual, she worked in various leadership roles in public health and Wisconsin state government. Without further ado, I will have Mr. Edgar lead us in the conversation of bringing down systemic barriers to defeat inequality.
Thank you, Sheilah, and welcome everyone. Buenas tardes. As you saw from the title of this presentation, bringing down systemic barriers to defeat inequality. You know, I didn't bring my chainsaw or my baseball bat here today, but I did bring some data and some stories to share with you. So without further ado, let's get started. So usually what I like to open up is giving you a little glimpse as to how our organization is structured when it comes to DEI. As you can see from this process map, it all begins on the left-hand side with the board of directors, having a workforce that is diverse to ensure that also our policies, procedures, products, and services meet those needs of the consumers that are diverse. And finally, how it impacts a business performance. So if you look at this map, what you see, the left-hand side is what Angela's group does, the diversity D&I, as we call it internally. And what my group does is the multicultural expertise focuses on sort of the marketplace, if you will. So together, left-hand and right-hand side is what makes, I think, this is a winning combination. So these structures are different across different organizations. Sometimes it's one team, sometimes it's two. But this is kind of how I explain it, because oftentimes people ask me, do you work with DI? And we say, yes, but we're a different team. So let me move on here and share with you a map of the United States. Some of you have seen this before. This shows and represents the diversity. Every county is portrayed with a different shade of orange. So the darker it is, the more diverse it is. So as you can see, naturally, the southern United States, probably, in the Texas region, Arizona, probably a lot more Hispanics. In the area of Alabama, Mississippi, probably more African Americans. But then you see some areas over here on the upper sections in South Dakota and even Wisconsin. And that's, of course, our Native American brothers and sisters. Now, what we don't see here in this map is, of course, Hawaii and some of the Pacific Islands, as well as Puerto Rico. But I'm sure if it was to be a heat map, it would show very bright orange. And that's something that we always want to keep an eye on. So, when we see that the United States for the past few years, we have seen the growth. And, over the past 5 years, multicultural, consumers have accounted about 100% of the US population growth and 61% of the credit union growth. And so in the 1980s, about 80% of the US population was white and the other 20% was people of color. And, incidentally, my family migrated to the United States here in the 80s. In fact, I have a little picture here. As you can see, there is a photo of my family sort of crossing the border. I don't know who took this picture. I'm sure it was not an immigration officer. But there was our Volkswagen Beetle, all our belongings on top, and my sister and I sort of in the back seat. But then you fast forward to today, right? 2020, we have about 59 and a half, almost 60% of the population white and 40%. So from the time that I came to now, it's almost double. So the question for your credit union is, where do you want to be? Do you want to be in the 80s or do you want to be in today's age? Well, the answer is neither, right? You actually want to look ahead. You want to look forward. You kind of want to go to what, the great Gretzky, the hockey player said, go where the puck is going to go, not where it is. And so that's something that, you think about the evolution, the progression of the United States and its fabric, you tend to wonder what kind of conversations have changed, how the dialogue has changed. And if what we're seeing today, even this year, has been sort of tremendously important for the conversation to take on a different turn. So with that said, let me turn now the conversation to biases. And I love this topic because everybody has a bias, whether we know it or not. We're all biases. There's, I think, documented over 100 biases in the social sciences. So one of the things that I'd like to say is that, we have this aspect of institutional introspection. I think that's a term that, I kind of, thought about, because it's something that we all do. We all talk about our own personal introspection. We reflect on matters. And part of this conversation is to use data to identify biases. Excuse me. So I'm going to simplify this and just simply say there are 3 different buckets. There's the aware and taking action. There's aware but not taking action, and there's the not aware. And the middle one is one that oftentimes you run into when we are presented with the data, but for whatever reason, we may not take any action, right? It's perhaps not a business priority, or the business need is not that big, or we just simply decided that's not where we want to go. And every organization has that. Not aware, of course, is something that, unless somebody shows us or let us know that it's a gap, we won't do anything about it. So as an organization, we ourselves have gone through this journey, and the examples or the stories that I'm going to share with you are going to reflect this journey that we've had, because it is a journey, and Angela's going to talk a little bit about that. Okay, so moving on here. Oh, before I move on, and I think we call this in the sphere of social sciences, the conscious bias and the unconscious biases, right? So with that said, let me give you a little bit of an example. So this is an example of sales. This is actually our form. If you go to our site, and as you're applying or you want to make a payment, you see there on the left-hand side, upper left-hand corner, you see there's a statement that says, pay your bill directly from your checking or savings account or by a credit card. So the question is, what is the assumption or bias here, right? Well, you may think there aren't any, because you know what, of course, you have a checking or savings or credit card, that's what we operate. But when we start looking at how people like to make payments, and you break that down by race and ethnicity, what we found was that if you are, for example, Hispanic or African American, look at where your preferences might be compared to Asians and whites. You may want to pay more with cash. You may want to pay more with money orders. Look at that, money orders. African Americans, 27% of the survey, it was a 12-month survey that was done by Simmons, indicated that African Americans prefer to pay by money orders. Now, if I go back to the other slide, we didn't put money orders in, pay your policy. So what does that tell you? We have a product that people want to buy, but perhaps we're not making it easy for them to buy. We're actually putting barriers, unintentional barriers ourselves. And so when we start asking these questions, we start looking at the data, we can design our policies and procedures better. That's basically what it is. And so, what's interesting is we learned over the years that our African-American consumers wanted to buy insurance policies, but somewhere along the ways, just the payment wasn't happening. And now we know that. So now we can take action in that direction. Is that clear? Does that make sense? So how do we make it easier for our members to buy? Now, here's another example. This example is on the service side. Again, the question is, what is the assumption or bias here? So, applicants fill out an application, how much coverage do you want? Typically done in conjunction with a credit union partnership through our True Stage program. So we put the birthday there, we put a beneficiary, who do you want listed as your beneficiary, phone number, email, and so forth. So what you see here is that, we just have room for one. And, one of the things we started hearing, going back to the African-American story, is that even though our African-American consumers wanted to buy the policy, some of them were not able to make that payment, but we're also getting a lot of calls in our call center saying, hey, where are my beneficiaries? How come they're not listed there? Which is strange, right? Because you would think, well, we would have made that in your welcome letter. We would have listed that. So we made a little visit. We took a trip to our call center and we spoke with our frontline reps. Like, what are you hearing? Why are all these calls? What are they about? And they said, frankly, we're getting quite a few calls asking about where are the rest of my beneficiaries? Like, why aren't my other beneficiaries listed in the welcome letter? And, one thing that dawned on us was, wait a minute. We know from research, from, multicultural research, that when we look at our households of color, especially Blacks, they tend to consider beneficiaries beyond their blood relatives, right? You see a picture here, a beautiful picture of a family reunion. Right? Some of these are cousins, siblings, neighbors, perhaps even, that along the way, they become part of the family. And when you think about this grandmother, perhaps, that wants to insure somebody that's perhaps not a blood relative, but they want to make sure that they get part of the policy, and they get a letter and they say, oh, here's your one or two beneficiaries. Well, of course, she's going to pick up the phone and say, hey, what happened? Perhaps in our system, we say, hey, don't worry, we're listed here. And she's going to say, no, 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 no. I want to see them here because I want to keep this document, because if something happens to me, I want my children or my cousins or my uncles and aunts to know that they're covered. And so this is the aware, but we're not taking any action yet. So what we did is we simply said, what if we were just to change the number of beneficiaries listed on the welcome letter from 2, because that was our standard, our legacy. Typically, traditionally, a white household perhaps would insure their spouse and the kid, or maybe their 2 kids. But when we talk about now multicultural consumers, maybe they want to insure, or they want to have somebody else listed in that. So this is an interesting piece of data that I'll share with you. So what you see in this chart is from June 17, July, 2017, we track the number of calls that we get. As you can see, the number at the bottom is about 19,000 calls, quite a few calls every month that we have to service. And the percentage, the orange line there shows the percentage of just beneficiary related questions, right? About 2% every month. That's about 400 calls purely asking about beneficiary questions. I mean, think about all the time. And this calls could take, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So if you do the math and you figure out, wow, that's quite a bit of time just answering a question that we don't even have to answer. So when we made the change, when we simply changed from 2 to 4 beneficiaries on the form, can you guess what happened to that orange bar, that line? Excuse me. Did it drop by, did it go from 1.92 was the latest data point before we did that, to go to 1.8, 1.7, 1.5? Here's what had happened. In the following 4 months, that number dropped almost 80%. That is crazy. I mean, I cannot believe it. When I was working on this project, I thought the data's got to be wrong. There's got to be something else that happened in the background. Did we implement anything else? And no, it was purely this change that triggered that. And so now think about the customer benefit. We don't have consumers anymore calling us to say, hey, what happened to my other beneficiaries? Because now they can see at least 4. Our customer service reps don't have to answer those calls. They can spend the time looking at something else. And so that's just a wonderful win for us. So we went from 400 to 80 calls a month. But what was more interesting is, remember, this was triggered by our Black consumers that said, hey, we're making this calls. But look what happens when we look at the data across the board. That dotted line right in the middle is when the change took place. Every single group, Caucasian, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, you see that line just trending downwards. And I think that is, that is a perfect example of what is called the curb cut effect. A curb cut, as you know, is that slice in the sidewalk that is used for people that normally have disabilities, right, in a wheelchair, but it also benefited other groups like elderly, perhaps with walkers, or children with bicycles or little tricycles going up. And so when you listen and you pay attention to other groups and their difficulties or the challenges, and you address them, you have collateral benefits. And this is a perfect example of that. So we're very happy about that. And, we learned a lot of lessons. Now, this happened, right? All that happened, before, I don't even want to say the C word anymore because it's, I want to make sure that goes away. But when this happened, there was a lot of things that came to our mind. And the question was, who is going to be impacted? Who's going to be disproportionately impacted or affected by this? We know now with data, and I think it's common, that our African-American brothers and sisters were disproportionately impacted with mortality rates, a lot more than whites and Asians. If you look at unemployment or underemployment, you see there the chart by race and ethnicity. This is from the Pew Research Center. Hispanics, actually, when you see that percentage, that 29% of Hispanics have been laid off or lost a job. 40% had to take a pay cut. So a net is 49%, followed by African Americans. So obviously, that's a concern for us. On one side, we're paying claims, right? We want to make sure that if our consumers have a policy and they died, we want to make sure that we get them that money fast, right? So their families can sustain themselves. And the other hand, we do worry that if they don't have the money, they lost a job, maybe they're not able to pay for that policy that's going to keep their family safe. So we're kind of in this mix of like, we want to do good and want to make sure that people keep their policies. So what happened? Let's look at the data. And this is the assumption that we had. Well, we have quite a few African-American consumers and Hispanics who were aware of this. What you see here on the left-hand side, left chart is on the y-axis, you see the average days since the bill was due. So about 40, 42%. You see a couple of lines there. Those are two different products. So they kind of move together. But when we started looking at this in March 12, when we started to see the bigger impact of this, is that the number of days of delayed payment spiked up about 9 days. Okay. Well, immediately comes to mind is like, well, who's defaulting? I just showed you the previous graph, right? Who lost their job? African Americans and Hispanics, and like, what's going on there? So I'm going to show you here what our breakdown was by if you look at all our past due premium, you bundle it like who has not paid, who owes us some of that. You see that about 29, almost 30% of that was African American, 50%, 51% was white, Hispanics probably about 8%, Asian a smaller piece, is very negligible, and then unknown. We have a data set. If it's either a mixed race or our algorithm cannot tell exactly what race they belong to, we just classify that as unknown. So this was before. What I mean by baseline is this was before COVID. There it is. I said it. I said I was not going to say it. Before that happened. And so what happened after that took place? How did that change? Well, surprisingly, look at this. Actually, our Black consumers went from 29, 25%. So of the past due premium, actually, they kept their policies. They did not default as often as perhaps our white consumers or other consumers. So that was very encouraging for us because we know those were the people that were suffering the most from this pandemic. So we were glad to see that. So that was an assumption, a bias, a worry that we had, but luckily, it did not turn out. We were glad that they kept their policies. So we were aware, but not taking action. So now what are we going to do? What can we do to help those consumers? So this is what we did. We allowed to have a grace period, a repayment plan. First, a grace period. So for the next few months between March and May, you don't have to worry about making that payment. Okay. But after a few months, we realized, okay, how do we help people? Because we don't want them to have this big amount that they owe after so many months. So let's work with them to make a payment plan. So in the next few months, we started doing that. And again, very, very favorable results. People want to keep their policies, right, during this time. And so this is something that we are constantly learning, tweaking, paying attention to the data to make sure that we're not penalizing people that have already a difficult situation. All right, so looking ahead, where is the puck going? Where the puck is going? I'll give you an example of what organization is looking at. So the Hispanic market, we know that is the fastest population, the minority population, at least proportionally in the next few years. So the data is clear, right? We know that as far as an opportunity, life expectancy is the second highest, is 83 years. So we know, we sell insurance products that we want you to stay alive because obviously, right, you pay your premium. And so that is good for us. It's also good because the buying power, the purchasing power of the Hispanic population, it is growing tremendously. In fact, it's become the 10th largest economy in the world. Okay, this is above Canada now. So this is definitely an area that we're looking at. Yet, we have ways to go because we still want to understand. And oftentimes people, when I give presentations to credit unions, they say, well, what about Spanish? And, should I translate this and that? And I say, the first thing you have to understand is look at your Hispanic market as different layers. And I show this tres leches cake here. I'm getting a little hungry because it's lunch hour. I haven't eaten lunch. But if you look at the Hispanic market in 3 different layers, you have the English speaking, the bilingual, and then Spanish, or the acculturated, bicultural, and unacculturated. And so the question you have to ask yourself is who are you serving? Where is your credit union? And so based on that, then you can design a strategy to say, well, what do I have to, translate? Does my staff reflect the population that we're serving? And so that's something that we're very cognizant of. We want to do something about it because we know that the market is growing. And the example that I'd like to say is, if you have ever traveled, right, to another country where English is not the main language, and you want to take a little souvenir home. You're talking whether you're in Africa, whether you're in Asia or India, and you're dealing with this merchant, and all of a sudden they speak your language. Doesn't that feel nice? Doesn't it feel like, wow, I can have a conversation? In other words, that merchant took the time to learn your language so they could buy their products. So this is a message that I share even within inside our own organization. Let's make it easier for our customers to buy the products that they want from us. So with that, one of the things that we want to announce is that for many years, when I joined the organization 3 years ago, we had a lot of we have a division called Loan Liner, which offers this documents to help transactions with credit union members, like loan applications or account openings, and we didn't have those. We had very few translations. Well, now we've made the commitment to translate all our documents that they want in Spanish. So going forward, now give us a call. This is just something that we're very proud of because it has taken much time and effort internally to say, let's serve your members better. So with that, I wanted just to say that we have a new purpose in our organization, and that is making a brighter financial future accessible to everyone. And I underline accessible and everyone because accessibility is very important. We tend to think perhaps about the ADA, right? American Disabilities Act, and how we made things accessible for them. So let's make things accessible to all consumers, everyone, not just the English speakers, but in any language and in any way they want to deal with us, in any channel and any payment method that they want. So I hope, and I invite you to ask yourself those introspective questions to find out where you are in your own journey. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic to my colleague, Angela Russell.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello,
Edgar,
Angela.
hey, Sheilah. Edgar, thanks for that overview. I've been looking at myself in the camera with this Zoom background, and I swear these Zoom backgrounds do not do anything for my hair. I look like I am out of a 1990s MC Hammer video. It's very odd. It's very awkward, but do not get distracted by my hair. I will try not to get distracted by my hair. And we're going to talk a little bit about some DEI foundational concepts and some other things that we all can be doing to help our organizations along this DEI journey. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Edgar. So you can just click through and I'll stay on this slide. So there are visible forms of diversity just means difference, right? There are visible forms of diversity and there are invisible forms of diversity. Just chat in the box real quick in your chat box. What are some visible forms of diversity? MC Hammer hair versus non-MC Hammer hair. Or just to highlight the difference between Edgar and I, hair versus no hair. So color of skin, hair, age, gender. Sometimes age, but not always. People who've seen me present will know that I will say, Black don't crack, so you don't always know how old we are just based on visual, how we look. So there's a whole variety of visible forms of difference. And then there are less obvious characteristics of difference. What are some less obvious characteristics? And you can just chat that in as well. So yes, if you're married versus single, ability status, mental illness, intellect, a whole variety of things, political affiliation, religion, educational background, income, and all of this goes in together and comprises diversity. So diversity is just difference. And inclusion is working to create an environment where everyone is participated and valued regardless of their diversity. So Edgar, we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I really like this, and I'm going to pause here for a second because inclusive and inclusion does not mean if you want to participate, you have to conform to the cultural social norms of the majority. It means that diversity is so vital that everyone will have their needs met and the opportunity to work and live up to their fullest potential. Renee Myers, who is a VP of Netflix, often says that organizations working on diversity want the black or the whitest black person, the straightest gay person, the most male female. That is not diversity. You are asking folks to assimilate. So as you are on this DEI journey, I encourage organizations and leaders at organizations to really figure out, what are you asking people to assimilate to? And then ask that question, Why are you asking folks to assimilate? One of the things that I think about is that there are so many unspoken cultural norms at our organization that we ask people to assimilate in order to get ahead. In the space of talent, one thing that I hear often is that people don't have quote unquote executive presence. To me, that is a red flag for potential bias, because up to this point in our organizations, who has been defining that notion of executive presence? It's mostly been white men, which excludes people who are different than that. So really begin to question, what are those cultural social norms that you're asking folks to conform to, and is that necessary, and how does that prevent you from going on the journey of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And so equity is creating a just and fair inclusion into society where everyone can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. It gives everyone a fair and just shot despite historic patterns of exclusion. PolicyLink, this organization that I've highlighted here, is an incredible organization. And back in July, they published a report called the CEO Guide on Racial Equity and how organizations can go along their path towards racial equity. And it's a really good guide. They're the ones that came up with this definition. And I really want to explain the difference between equality and equity. And we can go to the next slide to do this. So as Sheilah mentioned, most of my career has been in government. And in government, we wanted to treat everyone the same, right? Equal access, equal access, equal access. But in an equality model, we're not focused in on what people need. So in this model right here, this is an image that was created by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We have 4 folks wanting to participate in a bike ride. But we assume that if you want to participate in a bike ride, we're going to give you the same bike. But that's not meeting the needs that folks have. In an equity model, and you'll see that below, we're giving folks what they need in order to participate. So the person who is smaller has a right size bike for them. The person who is like the average height has that standard bike. Person has who's taller has a bike that's better suited for them to participate. And the person who has an inability to use their legs has a bike that's powered by their arms. So in an equity model, we are giving folks what they need in order to participate. Same thing that Edgar talked about in terms of the beneficiary letter. We're giving folks what they need in order to know that their family is covered. Make sense? All right. Sometimes I say equity is focused on equality of outcome as opposed to equality of input. So really, when you're focused in on equity for your members, making sure that every member has a good experience and is on the path to financial well-being. All right. Now, Sheilah mentioned that my background is public health. I am a public health nerd through and through and through. And this slide has been really, really important for me personally because it's really interesting, but it's also really revealing how COVID-19 is unfolding right before our eyes. So this slide is called the Bay Area Regional Health Inequities Initiative Model for Health Equity. Before coming to CUNA Mutual Group, my day job, whatever, I did health equity for a local health department. And in that, we were kind of looking at how do we reduce health disparities based on a variety of characteristics, but we were focused in on race. And at the beginning of my career, just to take a step into the way back time machine, my very first kind of research paper was on the disparities between Black and white women related to breast cancer mortality. So I'm going to start at the right hand of the slide right here and go to mortality, which is downstream. So we can think about breast cancer mortality. We can think about mortality on a whole variety of other things. Or I think because we are in 2020, let's think about COVID-19 mortality. We know that there are disparities by race as it relates to COVID-19 mortality. Sometimes in public health, not sometimes, all of the time, we know that differences in mortality are often driven by differences in disease and injury. So we know with COVID-19, if you have other comorbidities or other illnesses going on, you are more likely to have a not great impact. You're more likely to die as it relates to COVID-19. For a long time in public health, when we peel the onion a little bit further back, we would focus in on risk behaviors. Well, the reason why there's more disease among African Americans, or put in the historically marginalized group, is because there's differences in smoking, poor nutrition, low physical activity, violence, AODA, and a whole variety of other issues. So we would stop there in public health. We would just say, educate these folks, and they won't have these disparities. Sounds familiar to the financial services industry, right? If we just teach people about financial wellness, they'll be okay. But we shouldn't stop there. What we have to do is really begin to understand why there are differences in risk behaviors to begin with, right? And so for COVID-19, let's go back to there for just a second. We know that there are differences in living conditions which impact risk behaviors, which impact injury, which impact mortality over time. Differences in living conditions include the physical environment, economic and work environment, social environment, and services environment. So, for example, if you live in neighborhoods that don't have access to healthy foods, don't have access to safe physical recreational activity, or have a variety of other challenges and barriers, that will absolutely connect through and your risk behaviors, which impacts disease and injury, and which impacts mortality. Now let's take this one step further, actually a couple steps further, to institutional inequities. Institutional inequities oftentimes cause these differences in living conditions, which impact risk behaviors, disease and injury, and then mortality. Institutional inequities are driven by corporations and businesses, government, laws, schools and regulations, and non-for-profit organizations. And quite frankly, all of us are implicated in terms of institutional inequities. Here's an example. If you think about the history of redlining, which has had a huge impact on disparities in wealth, redlining not only has had an impact on disparities as it relates to wealth and financial well-being, it's also had a significant impact in terms of mortality. So we know that this institutional inequity, this policy, and the history of redlining has impacted living conditions, because then have segregated neighborhoods, we know that transportation policies are more likely in terms of highways to go through Black neighborhoods. We know that residential segregation impacts education, and it impacts which communities are invested in. Redlined communities are less likely to have access to healthy foods, less likely to have access to physical recreational activities, and less likely to have access to quality education, which impacts all of the downstream impacts, right? So if we take one more step further back, all of these institutional inequities are oftentimes baked in by our unconscious bias related to social inequities: class, race, immigration status, gender, sexual orientation. You name it, it's there. It's there. And so when Edgar talks about the importance of us understanding our unconscious and implicit biases, it's important because everything we do right now is going to impact folks for generations to come. And the disparities that we see right now as it relates to health or wealth or a variety of other things is based on what's been done in history. So I want to just pause for a second, because I know that's a lot. I could talk about this all day. This is like a semester long class, just this slide. But if you have questions about this, or observations, feel free to type them into the chat box. Edgar, let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
Angela, can I interrupt you just for a moment?
Yes.
Sure. We did have one question about that framework you have is just fantastic. Is there one that's relatable to financial services or financial well-being? Is there one out there that we can take a look at some other?
I haven't seen one. Edgar, if you want to go back to the slide for a second. I haven't seen one, but literally you can replace mortality or disease and injury with financial outcomes pretty easily.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So if you have your thoughts, your chat, this was literally just a reminder for me to pause for folks, because I know that that's a lot to take in. Go ahead and chat in your thoughts and questions, and then we can keep going. So this is a lot to take in. So when we think about institutional inequities that are baked in, one way to create a brighter future for future generations is recognizing that we need diversity at the table to create a brighter future for folks. Lots of times these institutional inequities were in place and that are having disparate impact now because there was a homogeneous population at the table, right? Everyone was the same. So this is one of the many reasons why diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important. So here are some common themes and emerging best practices that have have helped us at CUNA Mutual along our journey. Number one, high level of support. Bob Trunzo became our CEO in 2014, and one of the very first things that he did was that he added inclusion as a corporate value. If we did not have top level buy-in, the work of DEI wouldn't work. I've done this in other organizations where top level buy-in wasn't there, and the work just ended up being the work of a grassroots committee that never went anywhere. We actually called ourselves the Underground Railroad, but yeah, we were just spinning and spinning and spinning because we didn't have top level buy-in. Long-term commitment is really important. As I showed in that BARHII model, it's taken us a while to see the outcomes that we see now, and it'll take us a while to get newer outcomes for future generations. So to think that you can put together a 3 to 5 year plan and then be done is a little bit naive. So we're going to have a long-term commitment. Employee resource groups and affinity groups, people who have similar backgrounds and connect together, is really important for people to create a sense of community within your organization. Training is also a key emerging best practice, and not only training around awareness, but skills building as well. So we can't pretend to think that if we have a training series, everyone's going to have the skills that they need to be an inclusive worker in this workplace. It takes actual practice. So the analogy that I use is that I used to be very much into music. I played the piano and I played the flute for many, 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 many years. I couldn't become proficient, not only if I didn't have lessons were important, but I actually had to practice day in and day out in order to get to where I needed to be in terms of being able to perform music. Now, we're not all trying to get to Carnegie Hall for DEI, but if we want to create an inclusive workforce, we have to practice the skills necessary. The question that we use oftentimes in terms of equity is who's burdening from this decision and who's benefiting from this? One thing that comes up a lot in the space of credit unions is the notion of dress codes. Who's benefiting from this particular dress code and who's being burdened? Other aspect of things that's really important in terms of best practices is data. Understanding the quantitative landscape of your organization, and then also pairing that with the stories that you're hearing from people. Because if you just look at the quantitative data, you may come to the wrong conclusion. It's that the quantitative paired with those qualitative stories where you'll have the most amount of power and a better picture of what's actually going on. Collaboration and alignment with other efforts is really great. You're not going to be the only organization wanting to go down this path. So it's really important that you connect with and partner with other folks that are on this path too, so you can have shared learning together. And then because this is a long-term commitment, recognizing when you win, because you will have some wins along the way. Again, this is something that I don't do enough. I'm always like, all right, we did that, cool, let's go to the next thing. And then also realize when you mess up, because there will be some missteps. Okay, let's keep going here. And so I think about the things that we can all do moving forward from this presentation, and quite frankly, a lot of the talk around DEI right now. There are things that you can do at the individual level. There are things that you can do at your team level, and then there are things that you can do at your organizational level. Number one, at the individual level, you can do the work to uncover your own unconscious biases. Each one of us has unconscious biases, and it's not a character assessment. It's literally what's going on in the back of your brain. And biases in and of themselves are not a bad thing. So we have a bias towards eating food as opposed to paper clips. That's a good bias to have. But as we've evolved over time, we've developed biases against other human beings. So those are the biases that could be really quite harmful. So if you haven't already, really take some time to uncover what your own unconscious biases are. The other thing is commit to your continual learning. So I've been doing this type of work for a while now, and I'm still learning something new every day. There's this phrase of confident humility that is really important to me, knowing that confident that we're on the right path, but humble enough to say that we are going to be learning on this journey on a regular basis. At your team level, think about creating a team book club to read a book together and talk about what are some of the things that we can apply to our team. Also, a smaller is more tactical thing that you could do with your team is understand team dynamics and how they sometimes unintentionally exclude people. One very specific example is the notion of first speaker advantage. So if you're doing a team meeting, and you're facilitating one, know that the first person who speaks often sets the tone of your entire meeting. And as a facilitator, how are you going to balance that out to make sure that more voices are included? And then at your organization level, think about what would it look like for your organization to be committed to DEI in a real way. Understand and articulate your why. Your why is so important. And if you don't understand the why you're going on this journey, if you don't understand it, get to understand it really quickly, because that will be your North Star moving forward. Understand your why. Make sure that the people who are closest to the problem are a part of creating the solution. Brian Stevenson, who wrote the book Just Mercy, he talks about those closest to the pain are closest to the solution. Lots of times in the space of DEI, we have well-intentioned white folks in the leadership part of the organization wanting to dictate the change that's needed in DEI without actually consulting people who are closest to the pain. So make sure that you are being inclusive of folks who are closest to the pain as you go on your journey. All right, go ahead, next slide. So what can we do? 2020 has been a lot. My kids remind me on a regular basis that 2020 is a hot mess. They may have learned that phrase from me. But that doesn't mean that we have to pause DEI. What can we do during this moment? Be intentional. Tell your story. We each have a story related to DEI. Tell your story and tell the story of your members. Understand and embrace difference. Ask the equity question regarding decisions. The equity question is who's benefiting and who's being burdened. Here are some examples. Workplace reentry, if we ever decide to dress code, accessibility of products and services, and then know that you're not alone. Reach out and connect with each other. Next slide here. I think I've got one more. I love Brene Brown. I love her stuff, and she's got several new podcasts. But this quote is from her podcast called Unlocking Us. And I'll just close with this quote, and it says, this pandemic experience is a massive experiment in collective vulnerability. We can be our worst selves when we're afraid, or our very best, bravest selves. In the context of fear and vulnerability, there is often very little in between, because when we are uncertain and afraid, our default is self-protection. We don't have to be scary when we're scared. Let's choose awkward, brave, and kind. And let's choose each other. I think this is really important in this particular moment right now. So many of us are on edge. We're scared. We're in our self-protective mode, but that's not what's going to get us to the next step. So let's continue to be awkward. Let's continue to be brave, and let's choose each other.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. We can do this big round of applause and you just don't hear it. Thank you so much, Edgar. Thank you so much, Angela. I can only say that I love Inclusiv because they bring us good stuff. I'm gonna keep it that simple, that we can really take back with us. And in the chat room, there's just great conversation going on in the chat room, great information, books, different resources that you can tap into. So I encourage all of you to take a look at it. I know implicit bias was one of the things that we all deal with. This is not a race thing. This is a human being thing. And so we do have to look in the mirror sometimes and say, am I doing that? You know, kind of ask yourself that question. So certainly we've learned some things that we take for granted, that we look at it from our lens. And sometimes it really is distorted because it's just what we know. So this is a great, great conversation. And I thank you so much. Again, let's applaud all of our speakers. Now we will work other, I think we've got about 6 minutes. It ends at 3:30. Does anyone have any burning questions they'd like to ask our speakers or share? Let's see. Don't see anything right now. I don't want to leave you out because I know this is such a hard topic for one thing, but it's also a crucial topic, something that we certainly want to take back to our, not only that represent you, but like Angela said, your team and your organization.
I have a question, Sheilah.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Max. This question is for Angela. She brought up a good point about there being sort of a reference back to white men primarily in terms of behaviors in the workplace. As we're exploring that and looking to be open to multicultural work environments, how does an organization explore that in terms of defining what is considered a white male behavior versus a professional behavior versus multicultural behavior? And let me give you an example. So, you know, I come originally from Puerto Rico. So in Puerto Rico, we have tendencies towards, you know, we show up to events late. That's just what we do. And so I could make an argument that that's a Latino thing or a Puerto Rican thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but I can also make an argument that in a professional work environment, I need people to show up to my meetings on time. Mm-hmm. So that's just an example. And of course, I err towards, hey, you need to show up to my meetings on time, even if I'm Puerto Rican, right? But how can we navigate that? Do you have any advice for us as we're exploring that as a group?
Sure. I think that you look at your workplaces and ask your coworkers. So what do they think is, because I'm not going to be able to answer that for your organization. Every organization is different. Mm-hmm. I'll give an example, a personal example from me. So when I started at CUNA Mutual Group, I would do these informational interviews and I would talk about, one of my questions was, what do I need to do in order to succeed at CUNA Mutual Group? And literally so many people use this phrase, you need to become CUNA mutualized. And I'm like, that sounds terrifying and the opposite of inclusion. And inclusion is literally in my job title. Part of becoming CUNA mutualized was being able to navigate, and this is no story, no lie, being able to navigate SharePoint effectively. That was a part of the CUNA that I still don't know how to do that real well. I suck at it. So asking your employees, another kind of thing that we realized, one of the very first things that we did on this journey is that we took a 5-page swim lane document of the talent acquisition process and went decision node by decision node and said, what does bias look like at every decision point, right? You would be surprised, but then again, maybe not surprised at some of the things that came up. Tattoos, right? Sometimes people think that that is outside of the norm of what professional looks like. Maybe it used to be, but times are a-changing. That's one. Names, how folks dress. Dress code is something that comes up all of the time. There was at one point a conversation about are leggings professional? And I'm like, I'm the wrong person to have in this conversation because I wear leggings all of the time. Those are the things. What else? The other thing that I hear a lot, and this is specific to men, and it's a bias against men who are more introverted and have a quieter style, is that if someone is more introverted and has a quiet strength in leadership, and that are not that charismatic, salesy type person, that can go against some men. Some people like that charismatic, schmoozy extroversion. There's an automatic preference towards extroversion in leadership in men. So those are the types of things that we have to be careful and look at.
And thank you so much. There's so much that you can share with us, and I do appreciate the question and certainly appreciate the response. But it's almost time to close. So I want to give you a couple more things. We will now have a break. The intermission will be about 15 minutes. I want you to come back to the plenary session where you will hear about the role of community development credit unions have played in combating climate change and building a more equitable financial landscape. This Zoom will close and you can proceed back to your conference homepage to access the links for the plenaries. I get it all, I want to say more than that, and enter those Zoom meetings. Thank you all so very much. This has been more than phenomenal. Thank you to Inclusiv for bringing this fantastic topic to our audience. Have a wonderful day.